Sophia Reynolds had never once thought about the quiet man 3 desks down from her office. That night, she had no choice. Every hotel in the city was booked solid because of an international conference, and the only room left had a single bed and a couch. In the first few hours, all she saw was a polite, unremarkable employee named Liam Carter. Then the power failed. The servers behind a billion-dollar acquisition went dark, and Liam solved it in minutes without raising his voice. That was the moment Sophia understood she had no idea who actually worked for her. Liam Carter was 38 years old, and almost nobody at Halden Industries could have picked him out of a lineup. He worked in operations, on the 4th floor, in a cubicle that faced a support column instead of a window. He arrived before 6 every morning, while the building was still mostly dark, and the cleaning crew was finishing the lobby floors. He left after everyone else had gone home, sliding out through the side entrance so quietly that the night security guard, a friendly older man named Walter Briggs, was usually the only person who said goodnight to him. He never argued in meetings, never lobbied for credit, never joined the little clusters of coworkers who gathered by the coffee station to trade complaints about management. When people spoke to him, he answered fully and kindly, but he never volunteered more than he was asked. It gave him a kind of texture that was easy to overlook, not cold, not unfriendly, just remarkably good at not taking up space. One of the few people who bothered to actually talk to him was a mail clerk named Priscilla Doyle, who delivered packages to the 4th floor twice a day and had, over 4 years, developed a habit of leaving a granola bar on his desk on the days she noticed he'd skipped lunch. Liam always thanked her by name. It was, in its own small way, the closest thing he had to a friendship inside the building. The people who did notice him had given him 2 names, neither of which they used to his face. Mr. Invisible, quiet guy. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was just how the building had sorted him into the background, along with the ficus plants and the elevator music. Sophia Reynolds, on the other hand, was the kind of person a building organized itself around. 36 years old, the youngest CEO in Halden's history, she ran the company with a discipline that bordered on ruthlessness. She had inherited the position from a founder who trusted her instincts more than anyone else's, and in the 4 years since, she had cut 2 underperforming divisions, doubled the company's market share, and earned a reputation accurate, if a little cold, for never letting sentiment get in the way of a decision. She believed in exactly one thing when it came to her workforce. Performance never lies, she told a room of new hires that spring, the same line she'd used 100 times before. I don't care about your resume. I care about what you actually do. It was a philosophy that should have benefited a man like Liam. In practice, it never touched him, because Sophia had never once had a reason to look his way. In 4 years, she had not learned his name. The first sign that something didn't add up came on a Tuesday in March, during a routine quarterly review. Liam had been handed a stack of vendor reports to check. Before they went upstairs, a task considered so unglamorous that most people in his position rushed through it just to be done with it. He didn't rush. Halfway down the 3rd page, he found a discrepancy, a shipping cost line that had been quietly inflated by nearly 4% across 200 invoices, spread out just thinly enough that no single line item looked wrong on its own. He flagged it to his direct supervisor, a heavyset man named Gregory Hastings, who had been at Halden for 11 years and treated every junior employee's input as an inconvenience. It's fine, Gregory said, barely glancing at the printout before sliding it back across the desk. Vendors round up. Don't overthink it. It's not rounding, Liam said carefully. It's consistent, and it's compounding. Over a year, that's close to $200,000. Gregory rubbed his eyes, the particular gesture of a man who had a golf tee time to make and no patience for a subordinate's math. File it if you want. Nobody upstairs is going to read a 4-page memo about shipping variance. Liam didn't argue. He also didn't let it go. That night, after his shift technically ended, he stayed another 40 minutes, traced the discrepancy back to a single mismatched rate table, and fixed the numbers himself, quietly, without telling anyone. Nobody upstairs ever knew there had been a problem at all. Nobody down on the 4th floor ever knew Liam had solved it. He drove home to his small rental house on the edge of town, where his 8-year-old daughter, Grace, was waiting at the kitchen table with a plate of macaroni she'd insisted on making herself, orange cheese sauce smeared halfway up the pot on the stove. She asked him, as she did most nights, how his day was. Quiet, Liam told her, the way he always did. Good and quiet. He never thought about the invoices again. That should have been the end of it. Instead, 3 weeks later, an announcement went out that would change the shape of his life. By then, the small injustice with Gregory had already faded into the general background noise of Liam's days, the kind of thing he'd learned, over the years, not to dwell on. He had built a quiet, deliberate peace for himself, and part of that peace meant letting small unfairness slide off him rather than carrying it home to Grace. Halden Industries had won a seat at a closed-door negotiation in Chicago. A technology licensing deal worth close to $900 million, contingent on a final round of due diligence that had to be handled in person. It was the largest deal in the company's history, the kind that would either cement Sophia's reputation or become the first real dent in it. Sophia would attend. She would need one operations staffer to accompany her, someone who could handle logistics, data verification, and the unglamorous grind of a deal room under pressure. Someone reliable enough that she wouldn't have to think about them at all. Her assistant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rachel Simmons, presented her with 3 names. Sophia skimmed the list and stopped on the third. Carter, she said. Who's that? Operations. Been here 4 years. Clean record, no incidents, solid reviews. Rachel hesitated. Honestly, I don't know much else about him. Nobody does. Sophia should have picked one of the other 2, both more visible, both angling openly for her attention. Something about the blankness of Liam's file made her curious instead. Carter, she said again, tapping the page. Him. Down on the 4th floor, when the news reached him, Gregory Hastings looked personally offended. She picked you? He said, as if the words tasted strange in his mouth. Out of everyone on this floor, she picked the guy who barely says 2 words in a meeting. Guess so, Liam said, and went back to his monitor. Word spread quickly through the department, the way it always did. A junior analyst named Todd Whitaker, who had spent the better part of a year angling for exactly this kind of visibility, made no effort to hide his frustration. Must be a mistake, he muttered to a coworker, just loud enough for Liam to hear on his way past. Liam didn't respond. He packed his bag that evening the same way he always did, methodical and unhurried, and drove home to tell Grace he'd be away for a few days. Will you call me every night? She asked, already knowing the answer. Every single night, he told her. Same as always. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to spend 3 days trapped in a room with the one person in the company who had never bothered to learn his name, and by the end of it, she would know him better than anyone at Halden ever had. Chicago, in late spring, was chaos. A software conference had descended on the city at the exact same week as Halden's negotiation, filling every downtown hotel to capacity, banners strung across lobby entrances, badge-wearing crowds spilling out of every restaurant within blocks of the river. Rachel had booked 2 rooms months in advance, but a scheduling error on the hotel's side had merged the reservation into a single confirmation number, and by the time anyone noticed, the property had already resold the 2nd room to another guest who had arrived earlier in the day. Sophia had spent the flight reviewing the final due diligence packet, half listening to Liam beside her cross-check figures against an earlier draft, catching 2 small errors before they landed. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was, after all, exactly the kind of quiet competence she'd been told to expect from him. There has to be something, Sophia said into her phone, standing in the marble lobby of the Ashford Grand at 9 at night, her voice tight with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been in meetings since 6 that morning. The concierge, a nervous young man named Peter Doyle, apologized 4 separate times before finally admitting the truth. Ma'am, the entire property is sold out. Every hotel within 6 blocks is sold out. We already checked. We have 1 room left. It's an executive suite. It has a king bed and a sofa. That's genuinely all I can offer you tonight. That's unacceptable, Sophia said. though there was no real venom left in it. Only the flat exhaustion of a very long day. "We had a confirmed reservation. I understand, and I'm truly sorry," Peter said. "I've already called 2 other properties on your behalf. They're both fully booked through the weekend because of the conference." Sophia closed her eyes. She thought about calling off the trip and reworking the deal remotely, but the counterparty had insisted on face-to-face verification of the technical documentation, and there was no version of tomorrow's negotiation that worked without a room in this city tonight. She turned to Liam, who had been standing a few feet away, saying nothing, letting her handle it. "I am not thrilled about this," she said. "I'll take the couch," Liam said simply. "It's fine." There was no argument in his voice, no attempt to make it a bigger conversation than it needed to be. Sophia studied him for a second, really looked at him, maybe for the first time, and found only calm. "Fine," she said. "Let's go." The suite was large enough that the arrangement didn't feel as strange as she'd braced for. It had a small sitting area near the window, a kitchenette she doubted either of them would use, and a view of the river that neither of them looked at twice. Liam claimed the couch without complaint, set his laptop bag beside it, and spent the evening reviewing the due diligence documents, while Sophia worked at the desk across the room. They barely spoke. When they did, it was strictly business, a clarifying question about a licensing clause, a note about tomorrow's schedule, whether the printer downstairs could still make copies after 10. At one point, Sophia ordered coffee from room service for both of them without asking, and Liam thanked her with a small, surprised nod, as if he wasn't used to someone doing something for him without being asked first. Around 11, Sophia allowed herself a small, private thought. "He's easier to be around than I expected." She didn't examine that thought any further. She turned off her lamp a little after midnight and told herself the trip would be over in 2 days, and that whatever mild curiosity she felt about the quiet man on her couch would fade the moment they landed back home. Somewhere in the hour before she fell asleep, she thought briefly about her ex-fiancé, a private equity associate named Robert Ellison, who had once told her, not unkindly, that she'd rather run a company than build a life. She hadn't disagreed with him at the time. Lying awake in a hotel suite in a city she hadn't chosen, listening to the faint, even sound of someone else breathing across the room, she wasn't entirely sure she disagreed with him now either. It was nearly 1 in the morning when her phone lit up with 6 missed calls. The call, when Sophia finally answered it, was from the deal room's lead technical officer, a woman named Carol Whitmore, and her voice had the ragged edge of someone standing in the middle of a collapse. "The data room's down," Carol said. "The entire verification environment. We can't access the servers. We can't confirm the audit trail. And if we can't show clean documentation by 9 a.m., the other side is going to walk. Our engineers have been on it for 20 minutes and nobody can even tell me what actually failed." 20 minutes and nobody has an answer? Sophia's voice sharpened. "Carol, this is the single most important night of this deal. I know that," Carol said, and for a moment her composure cracked entirely. "I know exactly what tonight is. I don't have anything for you yet." Sophia sat up so fast the blanket slid to the floor. "Down how? Down since when?" 15 minutes ago. "Our engineers are on it, but nobody can find the fault. We might be looking at total data loss." Across the room, Liam had already swung his legs off the couch. He hadn't said a word, but he was watching Sophia's face, reading the shape of the emergency before she'd finished the call. "What is it?" he asked, once she'd hung up. "The verification servers for the deal are down. If it's not fixed by morning, we lose the licensing agreement." She was already pulling her laptop toward her, her hands unsteady in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I need to call the technical team back to the building." "Can I see the error logs?" Liam asked. Sophia blinked at him. "Your operations." "I used to do more than operations," he said, and something in his tone made her stop arguing and simply forward him the access link. What happened over the next 15 minutes stayed with Sophia for a long time afterward. Liam sat down at the desk, borrowed her laptop, and began moving through the system with a speed and certainty that had nothing to do with a junior staffer's training. He wasn't guessing. He was diagnosing methodically. The way a surgeon works a familiar procedure, ruling out possibilities one at a time without wasted motion. Your architecture routes everything through a single failover node, he said, half to himself, eyes not leaving the screen. That's your first mistake, no redundancy, so when it stumbles, everything downstream stumbles with it. Second, someone configured the firewall to reject traffic from the auditor's IP range after the last patch went out. That's not a crash. That's a misconfiguration wearing a crash's clothes. You can fix that? Sophia asked, standing behind him now, close enough to see the screen full of dense, shifting text she couldn't parse. I can fix that. He was already typing. Give me 15 minutes and call Carol back. Tell her not to restart anything on her end. If her engineers start rebooting nodes while I'm rerouting traffic, we'll lose the audit log entirely. Sophia relayed the instruction, and on the other end of the line, she heard Carol repeat it to a room full of engineers with visible relief, as if someone had finally handed them a rope. Liam typed for 11 minutes straight, occasionally muttering something about protocol handshakes and certificate chains that meant nothing to Sophia, but clearly meant everything to the problem in front of him. Twice he paused, frowned, and backed out of a change before trying a different approach, not flailing, just careful. The way someone works when they've been burned before by moving too fast. At, et, vertiotvo, m. The data room came back online. At 1:47, Carol called back. Breathless, to confirm the entire environment was stable, and the audit trail was intact, every document exactly where it needed to be. Sophia stood in the middle of the suite, staring at Liam like she'd never actually seen him before. Where did you learn to do that? She asked. Liam closed the laptop, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, something guarded, something old. I've read a lot, he said, and left it there. It wasn't a real answer, and they both knew it. Sophia didn't push, not that night. She thanked him, watched him close the laptop, and set it gently back on the desk, and noticed the way he immediately returned to the couch, as if the last 15 minutes hadn't happened at all, as if solving a crisis that would have taken most engineering teams until dawn was simply something he did and then set down. But as she lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling of a hotel suite in a city she hadn't chosen, one thought kept circling back on itself. No ordinary operations employee does what he just did. She thought about the calm in his voice on the phone, the certainty in his hands on the keyboard, the total absence of panic in a moment that had reduced an entire technical team to chaos. Something didn't fit, and Sophia Reynolds did not like things that didn't fit. The negotiation the next day went better than anyone had expected, and Sophia would later admit, though only to herself, that Liam's steady presence in the room had a great deal to do with it. The counterparty had sent a lead negotiator named Charles Winslow, a sharp, expensive attorney whose job was to find the smallest cracks in Halden's position and pry them wide. He had a habit of speaking slowly and smiling often, the kind of practiced warmth that Sophia had learned, over the years, to treat as a warning sign rather than a comfort. For the first hour, the session moved through routine terms, licensing scope, payment schedules, exclusivity windows, with Liam sitting a step behind Sophia's shoulder, saying nothing, occasionally sliding her a handwritten note with a number that needed double-checking. Midway through the session, Winslow slid a revised contract across the table, framing it as a minor formatting update, delivered with the same easy smile he'd worn all morning. Sophia was reaching for her pen when Liam's hand landed lightly on the edge of the page. "Give me a second," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. He read through the clause in question, 3 dense paragraphs about intellectual property carve-outs, written in the kind of deliberately exhausting legal language designed to make people stop reading before the second paragraph, and set the pen back down. "This isn't a formatting change," he said quietly, only to Sophia. Section 14 redefines derivative works. As written, it hands them retroactive rights to anything built on our licensed technology going back 2 years. That's tens of millions in exposure, minimum, and it's buried under a header that says clerical corrections. Sophia looked at the clause again, slower this time, and saw exactly what he meant, the careful, almost invisible shift in language that would have cost the company dearly a year down the road, long after anyone would think to look back at this exact page. She didn't sign. She looked up at Winslow with a pleasant, unhurried expression that gave nothing away. "We're going to need Section 14 rewritten before we go any further." Winslow's smile faltered, just slightly. "It's largely boilerplate." "It's not," Sophia said, and slid the contract back across the table. By the end of the session, the clause had been stripped out entirely, and the deal closed on Halden's terms, a version of the agreement that protected the company for years to come instead of quietly costing it a fortune. Winslow shook Sophia's hand at the end of the session with noticeably less warmth than he'd offered at the start, and made a point of avoiding Liam's eyes entirely on his way out of the room. In the elevator afterward, alone with Liam for the first time all day, Sophia said something she hadn't said to an employee in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she said. "You just saved this company a fortune." Liam nodded once. "Just doing my job." "No," she said. "You weren't." Nobody in operations reads derivative works clauses for fun. He didn't answer that, and the elevator doors opened before she could push further. But the question had already taken root, and it grew louder in her mind over the following days, back in the routine of the office, back to the version of Liam who sat quietly at his desk, facing a support column. She caught herself watching him differently in the days that followed, the way he moved through the office, unbothered by its usual currents of ambition and anxiety, the way his answers in meetings were always precise and never performative. It wasn't attraction, or not only that. It was something closer to recognition, the sense of standing near something far larger than its surroundings suggested. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, she asked him directly, standing at the edge of his cubicle, in a way that made two nearby employees suddenly very interested in their monitors. "Who are you, really?" she said. Liam looked up at her, unreadable, his hands stilling on the keyboard. "Just an employee," he said. "An employee who reads derivative works clauses for fun and rebuilds broken data architectures at 1 in the morning." Sophia crossed her arms. "That's not an answer, Liam." He held her gaze for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes that she couldn't quite name. "Not defiance." "Exactly. More like a door being carefully, deliberately kept shut." "It's the only one I've got right now," he said. It was the same answer he always gave, dressed in slightly different words. This time, Sophia didn't believe it for a second. Sophia did what she did best. She investigated. She started with human resources, where a records administrator named Diane Whitfield pulled Liam's personnel file and found it strangely thin for someone who'd been with the company 4 years. There was an MBA, completed with distinction, from a well-regarded program. There were 3 prior employers listed, all substantial companies, all with short tenures, 18 months here, 2 years there, never longer. No disciplinary notes, no performance flags of any kind, in either direction, no explanation for the gaps between jobs, some of them stretching 4 or 5 months at a time. "His references check out," Diane said, paging further through the file. "Every one of them." "That's actually unusual. Most files this old have at least one contact number that's disconnected. His are all still active. It's like whoever built this file expected someone to eventually come looking." "That's odd," Diane admitted, flipping through the file. "Usually a resume like this comes with references, recommendation letters, something." His folder's almost empty. Sophia took the thread outside the building. Through a mutual contact from business school, she reached a man named Nathan Blake, who had once worked alongside Liam at one of those earlier companies, now a partner at a consulting firm downtown. Nathan's reaction, when she said the name over the phone, was immediate, a short, surprised laugh. Like she'd said something impossible. "Liam Carter? You mean the Liam Carter?" "I don't know," Sophia said. "Tell me who that is." Nathan laughed again, a little disbelieving, like he was still catching up to the question. "He was the guy every CEO on the East Coast wanted to hire, back around 10 years ago. Corporate strategist, restructuring specialist, technology advisor, sometimes all 3 on the same engagement. I watched him walk into a company that was bleeding $40 million a year and turn it profitable in 14 months. Without laying off a single person in the process, he found the waste instead of finding people to cut. People called him a fixer. He could read a balance sheet, a legal contract, and a server architecture in the same afternoon and find the problem in all three, and he never seemed to break a sweat doing it. What happened to him? Nathan's voice sobered, the humor draining out of it. One day, he just stopped. Turned down every offer, and there were a lot of them. Went quiet. Nobody really knew why. There were rumors, something about his personal life falling apart, something about him just being done with the whole circus. We all just figured he burned out. People like that usually do, eventually. It's just rare to see it happen all at once. Sophia hung up the phone and sat very still in her office for a long time. The city lights outside her window blurring into something she wasn't really seeing. A man with that kind of history did not end up filing invoice reports at a company like Halden by accident. He didn't stumble into a fourth-floor cubicle, facing a support column. Something had driven him there, something big enough to make a man walk away from every door that had once been open to him. And deliberate enough that he'd stayed hidden for 4 full years, without a single slip. She wanted to know. Not for the company's sake. The answer came from a place Sophia hadn't expected: her own company's archives. Digging through old project records for an unrelated audit, late one evening when the office had emptied out around her, she stumbled across a crisis from 3 years earlier, before her time as CEO, when Halden had nearly lost its largest client after a catastrophic systems failure. The company had been saved, according to the official record, by a swift and decisive intervention from the operations management team, led at the time by Gregory Hastings, whose name appeared no fewer than 11 times across the surrounding documentation. Something about the phrasing bothered her. It read like the kind of language people used when they were covering a gap, rather than describing a victory, vague where it should have been specific, generous with adjectives, and thin on names. She pulled the internal email chain from that week and read it end to end, twice, cross-referencing every attachment against the timeline of the crisis itself. Buried in the thread was a message, time-stamped at 3:14 inches the morning, laying out in exact, technical detail the full solution that had ultimately saved the account. It was signed only with initials. L. Chi. Sophia sat back in her chair, reading the message twice more, checking the timestamp against everything else in the thread to make sure she wasn't misreading it. She cross-referenced login records from that night, pulling the terminal logs from IT with a request that raised no eyebrows since nobody thought to ask why the new CEO wanted 3-year-old access data. The message had come from a terminal registered to Liam Carter, logged in continuously from 11:52 p.m. until well past 4 in the morning. She kept reading. In the days that followed the crisis, Gregory Hastings had submitted the fix to senior leadership under his own name, in a memo that used the phrase "my team and I worked through the night," without once naming a single member of that team. He had received a bonus, a promotion recommendation, a glowing write-up in the company newsletter that Sophia now remembered seeing, years ago, without a second thought. A photograph of Gregory shaking hands with the previous CEO, the caption praising his hands-on leadership during a critical moment. Liam had never filed a complaint, had never mentioned it, not once, in 4 years of working 2 floors beneath the man who had built a career on his work, had simply gone back to his cubicle facing the support column and let someone else wear the credit for his work. The way he seemed to let so many things go without a fight. Sophia felt something sharpen in her chest, not just anger at Gregory, though there was plenty of that, but something closer to shame. She had spent years telling her employees that performance never lies, and an entire truth had been sitting 3 floors beneath her office the whole time, invisible, because nobody had ever bothered to look, herself included. She thought about every performance review she'd signed off on for Gregory Hastings. Every time his name had come up in a leadership meeting, as an example of the kind of employee Halden wanted more of, she thought about how easily a lie could survive inside a company, as long as it wore the right title and never had to answer to the person it had actually stolen from. She closed the file and made a decision. "I want a formal internal review," she told Rachel that afternoon. Quietly, for now. But I want to know exactly what happened 3 years ago, and I want every name attached to it. Before the review went any further, Sophia went to Liam directly. She found him after hours, the office nearly empty, except for the hum of the vending machines and a single cleaning cart parked near the elevators, and asked if he had a few minutes. He didn't ask why. He looked at her for a moment, set down the folder he'd been holding, and gestured to the empty conference room behind him, as if he'd known this conversation was coming for longer than she had. He seemed, in a strange way, like he'd been waiting for it for a long time, maybe even relieved that it was finally happening. "I know who you were," Sophia said. "Nathan Blake. The restructuring work. The email from 3 years ago that Gregory took credit for. I know all of it now. I want to hear the rest from you." Liam was quiet for a while before he answered, turning a coffee cup slowly on the table in front of him. "There isn't a dramatic story," he said finally. "I was good at fixing things. Companies, systems, contracts. I could see where they were breaking before anyone else could, sometimes before the people running them could. For a while, that felt like enough. I worked constantly, 80-hour weeks, sometimes more. I told myself it mattered, and for the companies, it genuinely did. I just never asked what it was costing on my end of the ledger. What changed? My marriage ended," he said simply. "Not because of one big thing. Just years of never being home, never being present, always solving someone else's crisis, instead of paying attention to my own life. I'd fly out on a Sunday night and come back the following Friday. And somewhere in there my wife stopped waiting up. By the time I noticed, it was too late to fix that one." He paused, and something in his face tightened, just briefly. "I got custody of my daughter, Grace. She was 5, and I realized I didn't actually know how to just sit with her. Be ordinary. I'd spent so long being indispensable to strangers that I'd forgotten how to be present for the one person who actually needed me. The first week it was just us. I didn't even know her favorite show." Sophia listened without interrupting, something in her posture softening in a way it rarely did in that building. "So I stopped," Liam said. "I turned down every offer, even the ones that would have set us up for life. I found the quietest job I could, one where nobody expected anything extraordinary from me, and I built my life around picking Grace up from school and being home for dinner. I never wanted credit again. I just wanted to be there, consistently, every day, not just the days it was convenient." Something in Sophia's chest loosened, unexpectedly, and she found herself saying something she hadn't planned to say. "I understand more of that than you'd think," she said. "Being the CEO means nobody around me is ever fully honest. Everyone's managing me instead of talking to me. My calendar has 11 meetings on it tomorrow, and I couldn't tell you which 3 of them actually matter." She let out a short breath, almost a laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. "I built a company where a man could solve a $900 million crisis, and I wouldn't even know his name." She looked at him. "I don't want to run things that way anymore." For the first time since she'd known him, Liam looked at her without any guard at all, no careful distance, no polite deflection, just a quiet, direct kind of attention that made the room feel smaller than it was. "Then don't," he said. It wasn't advice. It was an invitation, quiet and simple, the way everything about him seemed to be. Sophia didn't wait long to act. She created a new position. A small, deliberately unglamorous title. Special Projects Advisor. And assigned Liam to a struggling division that had been bleeding revenue for 2 years, a logistics and supply arm of the company that 3 separate consulting firms had already failed to turn around. The decision did not sit well with everyone. "You're putting a 4th-floor data entry clerk in charge of a 9-figure division?" said Victor Adler, a senior vice president who had built his career on hierarchy and tenure. His voice carrying the particular disbelief of a man who had never once had his own authority questioned. "With respect, Sophia, that's not how this company works. We have people with 15, 20 years of experience who would be better suited, none of whom have fixed it in 2 years of trying," Sophia said evenly. "It's how it's going to work now. Give him 90 days. If I'm wrong, I'll own that, publicly, in front of this exact room." Victor didn't have a response to that. Nobody else in the room did either. Liam didn't defend himself in the boardroom. He didn't need to. Over the following months, he did what he had always done quietly, except now people were finally watching. He started by simply listening, spending his first 2 weeks sitting in on the division's daily operations meetings, without changing a single thing, just taking notes, learning where the real friction was, instead of where the org chart said it should be. Then he began restructuring supply contracts that had been overpriced for years, quietly renegotiating terms with vendors who had grown comfortable padding their margins because nobody at Halden had ever pushed back. He rebuilt a customer retention program from the ground up, working alongside a hesitant but sharp young analyst named Ellen Brooks, who would later say it was the first time in her career a superior had actually asked for her opinion instead of just her hours, and had actually implemented half of what she suggested. He found a data bottleneck buried 3 systems deep that had been quietly costing the division nearly $2 million a year, and fixed it in an afternoon. The same unhurried, methodical way he'd fixed the servers in Chicago. He didn't do it alone, and he made a point of saying so at every step, crediting Ellen by name in every report, crediting the warehouse staff who had been flagging the same supply problem for a year without anyone listening. It was a small thing, but people noticed. Nobody on that team had ever had a manager who gave credit away instead of collecting it. By the end of the 90 days, the division had turned its first profit in 2 years. Victor Adler, to his credit, said nothing when the numbers came in. But Rachel noticed he stopped calling Liam the clerk after that. Word of the turnaround traveled fast, the way good news rarely did in a building that size. And for the first time in his career at Halden, people began stopping by Liam's new office just to say hello, some of them the very same co-workers who had once called him Mr. Invisible without a hint of self-awareness. Not everyone let it go so easily. Gregory Hastings, watching his old subordinate rise while the review into his own conduct quietly progressed behind closed doors, grew desperate. He began spreading a rumor through the 4th floor that Liam had manipulated the systems he'd supposedly fixed in Chicago, planting the failure himself to look like a hero in front of the CEO. It was a clumsy, panicked lie, and it did not survive contact with the access logs Sophia had already pulled, which showed the outage had originated from a firmware patch pushed by an outside vendor hours before Liam had ever touched a keyboard. Rachel brought the rumor to Sophia's attention within a day, along with the name of the coworker Gregory had told first. "He's scared," Rachel said simply. "People say strange things when they're scared." But it told Sophia something important. Gregory wasn't finished trying to protect himself, and she suspected he wouldn't stop until he had no other choice, until the truth was laid out somewhere he couldn't argue his way around it. Sophia called a company-wide meeting on a Friday morning, the kind of gathering that usually meant layoffs or a merger, and the room filled with the low, anxious hum of people bracing for bad news. Folding chairs had been set up in the largest conference space the building had, and employees from every floor filed in operations, legal, finance, the warehouse staff who rarely got summoned upstairs at all. Liam had been asked to attend without being told why, and he sat near the side of the room, arms loosely crossed, watching Sophia set up at the front, with the same calm he carried into every server crash and every contract review. Instead of bad news, Sophia stood at the front and opened with the truth. She walked the room through the crisis from 3 years earlier. The emails, the timestamps, the login records, all displayed without editorializing, letting the evidence speak plainly on the screen behind her. She showed the original message signed LC, time-stamped at 3:14 inches the morning. She showed the follow-up, where Gregory Hastings had claimed the fix as his own. The memo that never once mentioned another name. She laid out, in careful, unhurried detail, exactly what had happened and exactly who deserved the credit that had been quietly stolen, walking the room through it the way Liam himself might have methodically, without theatrics, letting the facts carry all the weight. The room went silent in a way rooms rarely do. A few people near the front turned to look at Gregory. Most didn't dare. Gregory, seated near the back, did not try to argue. There was nothing left to argue. His face had gone pale somewhere around the 3rd slide, and by the time Sophia finished, he was staring fixedly at the floor. He was placed on administrative leave that afternoon, pending a full review, and would not return to Halden Industries. Sophia turned to where Liam stood near the side of the stage. "I owe you an apology," she said, in front of the entire company. "Not just for 3 years ago. For every day since, that I let a man's work go unseen because I never bothered to ask who he was. I built this company on the idea that performance never lies. I never once stopped to ask myself whether I was actually paying attention to it, or just to the people loud enough to make sure I noticed." She turned back to the room. "That changes today. Starting now, every project this company runs will document who actually did the work. Not who presented it. Not who claimed it in a meeting afterward. Who did it." The room broke into applause, not the polite, obligatory kind, but something louder, more real. Chairs, scraping as people stood. Liam stood through it without moving much. The same steady calm he carried everywhere. Though Sophia thought she saw, just for a moment, something loosen in his shoulders that had probably been tight for 3 years. Afterward, when the room had mostly emptied, Sophia found him by the door. "You didn't smile," she said, "even once." "I don't need the apology," Liam said. "I never did. I just wanted the people who actually did the work to get their names on it. Ellen, Carol, the engineers in Chicago, who never got mentioned. Not just me." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, seeing, finally, the whole shape of the man who had been sitting 3 floors beneath her for 4 years. "I have an idea," she said. "And I don't think you're going to say no to this one." The title Sophia offered him was Director of Strategic Innovation. And this time, there was no debate in the boardroom. Even Victor Adler, who had once called him a clerk, offered a handshake and a short, genuine congratulations that surprised everyone in the room, Liam included. Nobody questioned whether Liam Carter belonged there. The numbers, and the last several months, had already answered that question for them. He and Sophia began working as genuine equals not boss and quiet subordinate, but 2 people rebuilding a culture that had let too many people go unseen for too long. Under their combined direction, Halden Industries introduced a new internal review process, specifically designed so that credit could never again be quietly reassigned, requiring every major project to document, in writing, exactly who had contributed what. Transparency became not a slogan on a wall but an actual, enforced standard, one that made a handful of longtime managers visibly uncomfortable and made almost everyone else breathe a little easier. Employees who had spent years working in the margins, people like Ellen Brooks, promoted that fall to lead her own team, like Carol Whitmore, finally given the budget she'd been requesting for years, found themselves promoted, recognized, finally seen. Even Priscilla Doyle, the mail clerk who had left granola bars on Liam's desk for 4 years, received a handwritten note from him the week his promotion was announced, thanking her for being the only person who'd ever bothered to notice him at all. What grew between Sophia and Liam did not arrive all at once. There was no single dramatic turn, no grand declaration in a hallway. It came slowly, in shared lunches that started as working meetings and stopped being about work halfway through, in late afternoons spent going over a project that could easily have been settled over email, but never quite was. There was the afternoon Sophia met Grace for the first time, kneeling down to shake the 8-year-old's hand, with a formality that made the girl giggle and ask, very seriously, whether Sophia was the lady from Dad's phone. There was the Saturday. Months later, when Sophia found herself at a school science fair, holding a paper plate of cookies, she had absolutely no idea how to bake, having offered anyway. Slowly, carefully, in the quiet, steady way, 2 people who had both spent years being unseen began to see each other not as CEO and employee, not as a rescue or a reward, but simply as 2 people who had finally stopped being invisible to one another. Months later, another negotiation took them to the same city, the same season. The unmistakable din of another conference filling every hotel downtown. This time, Sophia handled the booking herself, 3 weeks in advance. With a confirmation number, she checked twice. "I got us 2 rooms," she told Liam, in the back of the car from the airport, a small, deliberate smile on her face. watching him out of the corner of her eye. Liam raised an eyebrow. The same slow, careful expression he wore when he was working through a problem he already knew the answer to. "You sure about that?" Sophia considered it for exactly 1 second. The city lights sliding past the window, a year's worth of quiet changes sitting comfortably between them now, instead of a locked hotel door. "No," she said, "I'm not." They both laughed, and the car pulled up outside a hotel that, this time, had no shortage of rooms at all, and somehow, that no longer mattered. What mattered was the 4 years it had taken one honest look to finally happen. And the fact that, for the first time either of them could remember, neither one felt the need to hide any part of who they actually were.